everybody, this is John Blackstone. Thank you for joining me for another episode and another interview. Today's interview is with a gentleman named Stuart Epps, who I'm sure is no stranger to anyone who is as big a fan of British music as I am. Stuart is one of those guys that was right at the very, very beginning of Elton John's career. Not only that, but he was working for Dick James Music, which means he was mingling with the Beatles and just part of that whole amazing scene that was happening in London at that time in the late 60s. He then went on to travel with Elton as his personal assistant, and incredibly, he was there when John Lennon performed with the Elton John Band in New York City in 1974. Stuart went on to work with Jimmy Page, Bill Wyman from the Rolling Stones, Paul Rodgers from Bad Company, tons of British music royalty. And having a conversation with him was like opening a treasure chest. So here we go, my interview with Stuart Epps.
One of the first things I wanted to say is I enjoyed the stuff that you wrote about Elton's early days. I have to tell you, I've read pretty much everything that's out there about those days in his career. It was all of the kind of information that I was looking for that I never found anywhere else. I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciated that. I really enjoyed it.
They were just great times. It's just how it happened. It's just what it was all about, really. Elton was unknown when I met him. It's different, obviously, when people hear about these stories with him being now this famous guy. But at the time, it was just we were all youngsters getting into it, having fun. Well, most of us were. I don't know whether Elton was having fun or not. It's possible he wasn't having as much fun as we were.
Am I correct that at Dick James Music, you met Elton and then you guys kind of started hanging and listening to music together and that kind of thing? Is that how it went?
I started work at DJM, Dick James Music, in 1967 from school. I was 15. You know, I was the office boy. That's what I started at. And I really only was working there because of Clive, who I've been in bands with, I went to school with, and then he got to work at Dick James probably about a year before this. Starting work at Dick James Music, 15 years old, the office boy, there was plenty for me to do. I was the lowest of the low, so I'm cleaning out coffee machines, you know, getting sandwiches, doing everything really. At the same time, I started to meet these people. There was Caleb, there was Elton, there was quite a few other songwriters, crazy people. We're talking about 1967 in London, you know, it was a time when people were freaking out. Mind you, you look a bit freaky yourself, so you'd have fitted in. I don't know about the bowler hat, but you know, you'd have fitted in quite well there. It was hippie times, but I wasn't a hippie. I was from North London, you know, a lower middle class family, and they were very strange people that I was meeting. But I just took it, you know, I took it in my stride, really. I mean, I'm working for the Beatles music publisher. I'm going around to Paul McCartney's house. It was a hierarchical place, you know. It was quite strictly run in a way, even though you had all these madmen involved. You know, so I used to be able to go into the cutting room where Clive was cutting demo discs. I was just wide-eyed and laughing. That's an Elton song, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wide-eyed to what was going on and taking it all in. Clive went in the studio as assistant engineer. I became disc cutter, cutting demos that had been cut in the studio, Elton's demos, piano demos. This was an amazing time for me in the cutting room. We first got the Beatles' White Album before anyone else. I was cutting records for the Beatles, you know, and that was the beginning anyway.
When did you actually jump into the world of engineering? When did you start setting up mics, bringing up sounds? When did you jump into that part of your career?
I went from disc cutter, which I did for quite a long time. It might have been a year. A year was a long time, then a lot happened. Frank Owen was the engineer. He left the demo studio. So Clive then became the engineer, and I became his assistant. Of course, that was amazing. You know, he's teaching me, and I'm sitting there. Because in those days, a tape operator was what it says. As the tape operator was operating the tape machine. So
yeah, pushing the
but
button.
It was still a learning process for me. Clive was always one step ahead. It's a bit of a milestone in Elton's career as well. Because when I was a disc cutter, a guy started working for Dick James called Stephen Brown. Elton, Reg, you know, he was Reg in those days, said, oh, this guy Steve has started, he wants to hear the album that we've made. The album that Elton made with Caleb. Watching the Planes Go By, Turn to Me, Regimental Sergeant Zippo, if you know those tracks. This is the album that was never released. Anyway, so Steve comes into the control room. There was only Bernie and Elton in the room. I put the tape on, and Steve, a proper hippie, this guy. I mean, he's got, well, actually, you look a bit like him. You could be him. Long black hair, moustache. Yeah, maybe you are him. But
I'll play his part in the movie if they ever make a good one.
He seemed like a nice guy, kind of quiet guy. Anyway, I played the whole album. You know, it was 2 10-inch reels, so it was a lot of stuff. And then they left, and I found out afterwards Steve didn't think much of it. You know, and I thought, what a cheek, you know, who the hell is this guy? You know, how dare he say he doesn't like this album? We love this album, you know, and we love the sound, the production, everything was brilliant on it. But apparently, you know, you find out afterwards that Reg and Bernie actually got on with this guy quite well. He didn't like that, but he suggested to Elton that, you know, maybe he's got some better songs. Steve produced a single with Elton called Lady Samantha, which was totally brilliant.
Yeah.
It was the best thing that Elton had done up till then. It had Caleb on it. It was a great record. Clive engineered it. So our estimation of Steve went up, you know.
Sure.
This guy is now really doing great stuff. He started working on the Empty Sky album. So one way or another, after hearing Elton's songs, and I'm into songs, you know, I was an artist, you know, I was in bands and all that myself. So it was great that I was now in the studio with Clive. To be honest, I had my sights set on being in the music business more. I don't know how long, but I didn't stay in the studio very long at all with Clive. And I started what they call plugging. So I started working for Dick James Music as a plugger, and that means going around the BBC, and to be honest, it also means getting drunk at midday, and I didn't really take to that. I was still only 17 or something. And I started getting more friendly with Steve to the point where I became his assistant, you see. Time was just ridiculously quick in those days. And suddenly I'm working with Steve Brown, and then we formed DJM. You know, Steve had this idea to form a record label. So when DJM was formed, I now am fully Steve Brown's assistant running the record label. And that had everything to do with Elton, Hookfoot, Philip Godin Tate. We had some other artists on that label. You know, I was organising the DJM launch where Elton played live. And then all this started happening, that Elton got the chance to go and play in America, and got the chance to go to the Troubadour, to play at the Troubadour, and I wasn't asked to go on that. I had to stay back in the office. But Steve went to the Troubadour with Elton and Dee and Nigel, and, you know, it just went berserk. You know, they loved him there.
And the things you're giving me hold nothing for a gun.
About halfway through the set, I said, wow, this is going all the way. Going all the way.
Because up until then, you know, Elton had not been going down well in the clubs and in the universities. People were just ignoring him, really. And people were also ignoring him in the music press. You know, he was getting good reviews for the Empty Sky album, but you know, it wasn't going fast, to be honest. So America was now the place where it was happening. Everything just started to take off. I ended up going with Elton on the next tour, and I was still only 18 when I turned up at the airport to look after Elton on a 3-month tour of America.
Was that tour the 71 tour, or was it the Honky Chateau tour, the 1972 tour that you talk about?
It was probably 71, I would think. It was
All
the
right.
one where we did Carnegie Hall anyway.
There is one story that you tell that is so funny about the 1972 tour when Davey had joined the band and they were promoting Honky Chateau. Legs Larry Smith went on tour with Elton, and he would come out for one song.
Right, yeah.
I think I'm going to kill myself.
State of teenage blue. Oh, People say I'm the state of teenage blue. Oh, 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 oh. Thank you very much. That song was called I Think I'm Gonna Kill Myself, and in these shoes I got a pretty good chance, I'd say.
Your stories about the explosives that you dealt with.
Yeah, with the magic wand.
Yes, yeah.
It was a crazy... the thing is that, I was on 2 tours with Elton. We played the Fillmore East. That would have been the first tour as well. That was also the night that Elton thought someone shot him. Someone gave him a bottle of champagne and he took it back to the hotel, and it wasn't tied down properly and it went off in the night. And he called me because he thought he'd been shot. And but the thing is that we were like kids, really.
Yes.
You know, I'd never stayed in a Holiday Inn. I'd never seen beds that big before, you know. I mean, and we were living this life of what I thought was unbelievable luxury, you know. Breakfast in the morning and loving America. I mean, that's the main thing. And that's the main reason why I think Elton took off so hugely, because he loved America. He loved being there.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big chore for him to do a 3-month tour. It was like the best thing that ever happened in his life.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure there were times when he was a bit, had personal problems, I don't know, but it was all great fun. It was all wonderful. And of course, it was also incredibly good for Elton's career. It's all taking off. You know, all the albums started entering the charts, and it's all because of America, really, all because of Americans like you.
It's similar to the Beatles, you know, when they came to America, they had such a love for American music, but it was this mutual admiration society, because when the British came here with the Beatles, you basically dominated music for, 10, 15 years. I mean, all of my favorite artists are all British artists by far. I don't know what was in the water over there at the time, but man, the music that has come out of England from, 64 on is just
that's how we
incredible.
felt about American music. Because Elton was like a big fan of, a total fan of music, and that him and Caleb used to go and get these American imports, and they always sounded better, they were always louder. So that's the thing, we were digging American music, and America was digging what was happening in the UK, and it was brilliant.
Most people that are in the music industry have an epiphany moment, or a moment where it just kind of hits them. I have to do this. I have to be involved in this. Did you have a moment like that you recall?
The only moment that I've had like that was not in the early days. It was when we ended up in Hawaii on the Elton Kiki tour. I'd fallen in love actually with a woman who had lived in an ice cream van. And anyway, I thought I'm going to retire. You know, I've done it all. I've had enough. I'm getting old. You know, I was 23 now. It's time to rest. You know. So I went to see Gus, who was working at Rockfield with a band called Solution, actually, on the Rocket label, to tell him that I was leaving, because actually I was now working with John Reid. Steve Brown had left, and it wasn't good. He was getting on my nerves. He was awful, really. He's terrible. And Gus said, well, that's a shame you're leaving, but that's when he told me about he was going to build the mill. He was going to build this studio, you see. So I've never seen it as an epiphany moment, but it was, because I instantly knew that I wanted to do that and not move to Hawaii and live in an ice cream van. Although it sounded great, anything Gus did was bound to be top class. That was an epiphany moment. It probably was a very good idea, because that led to me being involved in the mill, working and then with Jimmy Page in the end, and Led Zeppelin, and as soon as we put the mill together, I got back into what I always loved, which was being part of making music, really. In the early days, there weren't every moment was, you just did it, you know. There was nothing to think about. You just did it because you loved it. And I was just very lucky. You went from one thing to another. It was only in later years, to be honest, that you start thinking about, might need to make some money here, or money became important, or position became important. We never had a thought for that. I don't think Elton did either. As much as he loves to spend, you know, and he's become a billionaire, you know, he's become so rich. People say that now, that you know, want to get into music to make money or something, and you say, well, good luck, but that's not why we ever did it, you know.
That's one of the beautiful things about your essay that you wrote. You very much captured that innocence in the way that you wrote those stories of you guys being on the road.
Right, yeah.
And it's just it's so rich, and it reminds me of a time when before the music industry became the mega beast that it is now. There was a time when an artist, to become successful, had to go and do the work and had to have that kind of passion. It wasn't American Idol.
That's exactly right. You're absolutely right, John. Kids watch this on the TV now, and they see someone coming in, and within like weeks they become a superstar, and they think, well, that was easy, I can do that. You know, the connection with Elton, I mean, although we all believed in him, the main person that mattered was him, believing in himself and pushing himself to the limits that he did, on top of being the most talented musician you can imagine, you know. And together with Bernie, that incredible relationship, that doesn't happen very often.
It's similar to the Beatles thing when you think about how the Beatles ended up with George Martin and had such a great
Incredible
management.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, from my point of view, the Beatles story is way, way up here somewhere.
Yes,
You know, that story is so unbelievable.
it is.
And all the dynamics involved, you know, you got four people, and like you say, the luck of those guys meeting up with George Martin and ending up at the best studio on the planet.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, for free.
amazing. That's what made me become a musician, was discovering the Beatles, as it is for a lot of people. But their story has so much magic and synchronicity in it. It's just like everything just fell perfectly in line, but they had to do the work. That's kind of how I see Elton's career as well. He did the work, and he had the talent, the creativity. Do you remember when the light bulb went on for you as far as Elton, like understanding, oh, this guy is like talented?
That was from the very first moment he sat at the piano and played me a song. Well, I was 15 years old. Clive would play the piano, I would sing from when we were about 13 or 14. But it was the first time I'd been in a studio where a grown man, because he's that much older than me, sat down at the piano and played a song that I'd never heard before, for a start. That was an epiphany moment. And that was when I actually thought, this bloke's brilliant. He's a lot better than I'll ever be. I'm never going to be like that. I don't write songs like that, you know. When you're in that proximity, let alone when you see him at a gig, but if you're just sat in a room and he's there and he's playing the piano and singing, he sets up an atmosphere. That's what he does, you know. Even if he's not dressed as Mickey Mouse or something, you know,
Yeah.
if he's just in normal clothes, what he does there is why he's a superstar, because he performs, and I'd never seen this before. That was when I decided, oh, I want to be with this guy. I want to see him do it. I want to get involved in his career, is basically what I thought. When you listen to the Beatles' White Album or something, you know,
Yeah.
when you listen to something magical, James Taylor or I don't know, whatever you're into, that atmosphere that happens where you get tingles and all that.
Yes.
It wasn't like, blimey, I could make some money here or something, or I could be his manager, which is probably what I should have done, to be honest. I never really think of it as an epiphany moment. I have to sort of think about how to pronounce that word. But it's a good thought, because they do happen. The other epiphany was when, obviously, at Madison Square Gardens,
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't an epiphany moment in my career, but it was an epiphany moment for all of us that were there. To
Yes.
see, you know, to be hanging out with John Lennon and to see him shitting himself backstage and to be with him when he walked up those stairs, and then to be there at this 10,000 people going bananas for John Lennon, and you were there to see it, you know, with all your mates.
Unbelievable. I would say that show is in the top 5 most important gigs in pop music history. I would put that there easily.
Yeah, that's what people they tend to say that. Any of us that were there would say that's about right, because it was an incredible night. When we had John Lennon and we were all backstage at Madison Square, I'm such a, you know, potty Beatles fan. I was just following him around everywhere, you know.
Yes.
And I ended up in his dressing room. And at the time he was with May Pang, you see. And there was only the three of us. I definitely know that. And there was a knock on the door. So as the sort of management person, I went to open the door. I opened the door and there's Yoko Ono standing there. And I went, oh my God, I felt that he's with another woman. He's obviously with Yoko, and now she's found out he's with someone else. And I've opened the door, and there's going to be some almighty argument, you know, that I'm going to be involved in here.
Yes.
Anyway, but behind Yoko was Elton's, our mate, really. I can't remember his name now.
Was it Tony King by any chance? Tony King?
Tony King, you're right, yeah. Yeah, it was Tony King. Anyway, he was giving it the thumbs up. She came in, and apparently it was that night where John and Yoko got back together again. And who was to know that actually she was responsible for putting John and May Pang together, who was her assistant or secretary or something. I was still hanging on to, well, I wasn't hanging on to John, but I was following him. Elton was already on stage, you know, going down a storm. And I was walking with John, and I definitely remember the stairs at the back of Madison Square when he started to go up the stairs, and he was, he was nervous, you know. And he said something like, oh, well, here we go, over the hill, as if he was going to war. That's what they used to say when they were going to war. Because it's a bit like that, you know, you're going up over the, the trenches, you know.
Sure.
As he hit the stage, the place went nuts. They went into white noise. It was louder than normal crowd sound. It was so loud that it actually went into this sort of white noise of sound that seemed to go on forever.
Seeing it's Thanksgiving, we thought we'd make tonight a little bit of a joyous occasion by inviting someone up with us onto stage. And I'm sure he will be no stranger to anybody in the audience when I say it's our great privilege and your great privilege to see and hear Mr. John Lennon.
And so we all were like, you know, we knew he was going to go down a storm. I don't know what was up with him, and then I just sort of ran out to the front so I could see it. And when they went into, I don't know, I saw her standing there or whatever it was. The whole place, because actually Madison Square Gardens, the hall is on rubber. Well, it moves up and down, basically. The floor is sort of sprung. And I remember worrying because the PA, which was hanging from the ceiling, was doing this as well. And at the same time I was thinking, this is unbelievable. This is better than any Elton gig I've ever seen. The audience is better than any audience I've ever seen. I was also worrying that one of these speakers doesn't fall down and, you know, kill a load of people. But and Gus Dudgeon was backstage recording it. He was in a truck somewhere.
Thank God he was recording it.
Yeah, it was an amazing night. So, I mean, it's nice when you hear Elton talk about it. He said it was his best gig as well ever. Although I think he might have just surpassed that with this latest gig at
Glastonbury?
Glastonbury. Well done, Glastonbury, yeah. I should think that now takes precedence at his best gig ever. It's the only time I think I've ever watched Elton's whole gig ever. Couldn't watch a whole show, and I never would sit in the audience. I was always backstage or running about. But I watched the whole gig, and to see 100,000 or 120,000 people, digging Elton John still gives me a thrill, It's still like, I remember when there were just 20 people all chatting instead of listening. So I still get a big kick out of seeing how amazingly he goes down,
When you just said that, 20 people watching, it reminded me of something that you wrote about how when Elton was playing a show and people were sitting around talking, that you felt compelled, or maybe you actually did go around and tell people to it's like, shut up and listen,
Shut
you
up,
were so,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah, Well, the thing is that when we were promoting Elton, we were so excited about what he was doing and what we were doing with him. We wanted to share it with everyone, so it's not just family and friends. If you were in a taxi and suddenly he came on the radio, you'd go, wow, can you just turn this up a sec, They go, whoa. Well, no, this is he's going to be big, this guy. What's his name? Oh, Elton John. Never heard of him. Funny name, that is.
Yeah,
especially in America, where a John is toilet, they've Elton Toilet. That's a good name. But there's a TV soap program called Coronation Street. It's been going for about 50 years, And I distinctly remember that there was a party in one of the houses, and they were playing an Elton song. I was ringing up Steve, turn your TV on. They're playing Elton on Coronation Street, Anything that happened in those days was news, and we all used to ring each other up. It was a great team, and it was a lot of camaraderie, or whatever the word is,
Yes.
I don't know whether there's so much of that now,
We'd like to do one of Bernie's best ever lyrics. It's really beautiful, and it features Paul Buckmaster on solo cello. The number is called The Greatest Discovery. I'd like to introduce on bass guitar, Dee Murray, and on drums, Nigel. I've got the biggest kid in the world, Olsen, and my new band, and we're going to do a number called Burn Down the Mission. Thank you very much. Tell me there's an angel in your tree. Did he say he'd come to call on me? Yeah. But things are getting desperate in our home. Living in the parish of the restless folks I know. Everybody now, bring your family down to the riverside. Look to the east to see where the fat stock hide. Behind four walls of stone, the rich man sleeps. It's time we put the flame torch to their key. Burn down the mission, Lord, if we're gonna stay alive. Watch the black smoke fly to heaven, see the red flame light the sky. Burn down the mission, Lord, if we're gonna stay alive. It's our only chance of living. Take all you need.
original team that made those early albums, they used to have meetings about the recording sessions, and was an incredible team. I try to say that to youngsters now who generally only work on their own. You know, they don't even have bands anymore. All these solo artists, whether they're young girls or young guys, sitting in front of a TV screen trying to be great, you know. Like in the old days, the best music was made in teams of people. Sometimes they were called bands, you know.
Yes.
You know, and I know it sounds like old fogies talking, but I don't see how you can refute it, really, because when you see that film of the Beatles working together, and you see how John and Paul fed off each other and worked together, it's like, that was the genius. That's what made that music.
Don't let me down. Don't let me down.
And that music's lasted 60 years. You know, not 6 weeks or a year or two. It's 60 years. It still sounds amazing. And
Absolutely.
it still influences writers and musicians. They're still trying to figure it out.
That's right.
You know, how did they do it? The way they did it was because there were 2 of them or 3 of them or 4 of them. And they were arguing and shouting, you know, like some mad family, you know, got together, 4 guys, ripping each other to pieces, you know, and then trying to outdo each other. And if you can do that, I can do this, you know. That's how the greatness was made, really. I think it's very difficult for a single person to pull that off, really.
As a producer myself, I used to do a lot of work here in Seattle producing artists. And what you just described has been my experience exactly. There's all these people that don't even understand the importance of a producer anymore, much less an engineer. They're sitting in their rooms, as you described, staring at this screen. It's almost been heartbreaking for me because I love working with artists like you do. I love producing. Sometimes I'll go to clubs and find somebody I really like, and I'll say, hey, you know, I'd love to work with you. They don't understand it.
Yeah, I get sort of both scenarios. I get people that don't understand it, don't even think it's necessary, and then I still get even youngsters. You know, I'm working with a 14-year-old girl whose mother brought her in, and they do appreciate being in the studio environment and the experience that I can bring to it. I get those as well as the ones where it's like they don't see it, or they prefer to. It's mainly the girls, actually, to be honest, that they think, well, they can do it better, and, you know, they want to do something that's never been done before, you know. So you don't want to work with someone that's been doing it for 50 years because that would be old-fashioned.
Sure.
And the thing is that we grew up with artists who were basing their music and their career on what went with before. You know, on blues music and on jazz that happened, you know, loving the music that went before them and then wanting to build on that. That's where that great music came from.
One thing that you said a minute ago really resonates with me, and that is the longevity of music that came from that period, like 1964 to the late 70s. There's this period of music that I firmly believe, including Elton's catalog, will be listened to and celebrated centuries from now. I'm convinced of that. And one of the reasons I'm convinced of it is because of what you described at the Glastonbury show. There's aren't hundreds of thousands of people going to see some 80s artist or some 90s artist. A lot of that music that has come out since the 70s is basically going to just fade into memory. But the really great stuff, mainly because of the amazing songs that were written, that stuff's going to last for centuries. When McCartney plays or the Stones play or Elton plays, packed audience, you know, massive arenas packed.
And they're all ages as well. Whenever I,
That's right,
you know, went to an Elton gig and there's like kids in the audience, it's like, what are they doing here, you know? When you were saying that period, 64 whatever to 75 or whatever it is, it's also, it reminds you of classical music in a way. How classical music has stood the test of time. When you hear a Beatles song, it doesn't seem to have the same time element stuck on it, you know. It just seems timeless, I suppose. That's the thing, yeah. And the same goes for Joni Mitchell for me, and James Taylor, Crosby, Stills, Nash, Jackson Browne,
Yes.
you know, or people from Cat
Yes.
Stevens, you know. It was an incredible
Oh, yeah.
period of singer-songwriters.
The Beatles hit such a Mount Everest of achievement. It's almost like when they broke up, all of those early singer-songwriters took the gauntlet. It's like, now we're going to do what they did. We're going to write these amazing songs, and we're going to, you know, we're going to compete.
That's absolutely right, because the Beatles were like one of the first people to write their own songs.
Yes.
I mean, up until that point, it was people writing for people. The singer-songwriter period came, like you say, following the Beatles. It definitely did. You're right, and I'm sure you're right. You know, we'll be listening to we won't, but people will be listening to that music in 100 years' time, and maybe not listening to, I don't know, George Michael, or maybe not even Michael Jackson. Or it's music that was made in a particular time period which almost seems to have passed. You know, it doesn't seem to stand up in the same way, maybe, because
Yes.
it's stuck in that era.
One of the things I think that makes that music so timeless is that it's actually real human beings in a room together playing music together. That's why when you hear those records, like the Beatles records, there's this vibrancy, there's this thing that just resonates out of there that you cannot emulate with technology. You can't. It has to be a real human experience, and that's just lost now, it seems like. Not completely, but you know what I'm saying.
There's a word that people use from that era to do with recording, and that word is magic. It's the magic of the recording studio and of the dynamic with the engineer and the producer and the assistant, and then the band or the artists out in that room with all the mics and everything else. We're creating this atmosphere with musical instruments and doing it live. So few can do that now anyway. And busting themselves to do it, you know, giving themselves completely to it. When I was working with Jimmy Page and also with Paul Rodgers, we were definitely working in that old-fashioned way, where I had them out in the studio all playing live together, praying that nothing blew up while they were doing this take, because
Sure.
I knew that this take was magic. And there is a difference when you're making music like that and you've got a great player in front of you, and we've hit the record button and he puts down the magic performance. You know, now and again that does still happen.
I actually was talking to Caleb about this subject, and one of the things that came out of that conversation was when the click track became the standard in recording studios, how that was like the beginning of everything becoming very linear. And when you listen to those old records, there's no click track there. They're not a slave to anything. They're playing and interacting with each other, and the tempo will go up sometimes and go down.
Well, the only thing is, John, is that if you've not got a click, you better be a good musician. And if you're a band playing together, you better be very tight. And the reason why the click became important was to help people that maybe weren't so great. You know, there's an Elton track that I used to love, and I used to mix it all the time when I was at the mill. Crazy Water, it's called.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
If you take the BPM from the intro and compare it with the outro, it's ridiculous. I don't exactly know what it is,
Yes.
but it's like almost double
Yes.
the speed. You know? Because Popey, that's what he would do. I mean, he'd increase, you know, and the band goes with him. And then every time anyone puts anything on, they've got to go with, you know, you went with the drummer. But what you got from that was like a live performance, you know, an increased intensity throughout the track. The problem is now that if you've got this metronomic click, it's much more difficult to get excitement on a record when it's not speeding up and slowing down. And what you get from that, though, is this amazing atmosphere of feel. That's what we used to call it, or groove, or whatever you want to call it. You know, it's not metronomic. It's like breathing. You know, it just feels so much better, really. Like, you know, it's like the band. You know, Bob Dylan's band or Little Feat, they weren't, there's no clicks there. There weren't any clicks involved there with Levon Helm or whatever, you know. When you listen to Cripple Creek or one of those tracks from a band album, There's nothing machine-like about it, you know, it's the feel, isn't it? I miss that, I really miss it. And I think it would still be appreciated, really. It's actually a bit frightening to think of doing a track without a click now for me, I must admit that.
I did a project recently where I did have full band in the recording studio, even with the percussionist as well as the drummer. We started out doing it with a click, just like I've been doing forever, and I suddenly thought, wait a second. So I took the click out. I realized for myself, it's like I have to get over that. I have to break out of that.
Well, because it's frightening these days for a producer to do that. You were very brave.
It took some courage. It really did.
It's the same with tuning, isn't it? I mean, I've got a tuner here. You can't imagine that there was a time when you didn't have one of these, you know.
Yes.
And everyone would tune up to the piano.
Yeah.
And they'd just be going, oh, that's about right, that'll do.
Yeah. I hear on those Elton concerts in the 70s that Elton would basically hit a note on the piano and Davey would be tuning up to it on stage, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's all there was. We're getting technical now, but what happened was when everyone started tuning up, everyone's perfectly in tune, and the only one who's not is the singer now. And then that's when tuning had to be invented for the singer now. So everything's in tune, everything's perfect. Timing, tuning. It does tend to make the music a little bit more sterile than it used to be, I suppose.
Well, I was just going to ask you to talk about your experiences in the mill. And I know that Gus opened the mill and then he ended up selling it to Jimmy Page. And then you started working with Jimmy Page. Was one of the first projects you did there, was that when you put Coda together, the Zeppelin album Coda? Was that one of the first things?
Yeah, Gus ran into financial problems and had to sell the mill. There was a lot of mystery behind it. This guy's turning up from a band, you know, he's obviously famous. And that was when Jimmy turned up. That's the first time we met him. But he was very quiet, very shy. But then we found out that he wants to buy the studio, and he wanted to keep me on. You know, I was happy. I was happy at the mill, so I wasn't a big Led Zeppelin fan. I didn't know much about them or Jimmy or anything. They were a famous band, I knew that. So, in fact, when Elton got his first stereo, he had this incredible stereo system, and we used to play Zeppelin 2, you know, blasting, and it was amazing. You know, when I started working for Jimmy, then I found out what a kind of strange, slightly, well, not more than slightly eccentric guy he is, or was, or is. And I didn't actually meet him for a couple of months, you know, although he bought the studio. Obviously, I assumed we'd be doing the next Zeppelin album, so I was getting ready and thinking about how we would do this. And then there was this terrible news that John Bonham, you know, they were just about to go on tour, and then Bonham was found dead at Jimmy's house. Then I just assumed that they'd get a new drummer, but then that didn't look like it was going to happen. And I still hadn't really, I'd only met Jimmy a couple of times, but these tapes started arriving. Zeppelin tapes started arriving, and then we must have had a conversation that he wanted to put together a tribute album to John Bonham. And you're right, the first project we got to do was to mix this Bonzo's Montreux, which was basically 24 tracks of drums. A bit of a crazy track. It was being thrown in the deep end, really, because Jimmy wasn't the easiest person to understand what he wanted, but, you know, I was so comfortable at the mill. There was nothing I couldn't do there, really. We put together the Coda album, and there was a couple of tracks I mixed from In Through the Outdoor that was brilliant. And then this whole period, which was actually 5 years working with Jimmy, was quite amazing for my career. I was now studio manager. I was producing now, and that became very successful. I started working with Vandenberg, and then we had friends of Jimmy's turning up. We had Mick Fleetwood, George Harrison, you know, some amazing people coming down to the mill. And yeah, it was a great time, absolutely great time, really. There was a few weird things that were going on, and working with Jimmy was a little bit, I thought something might happen, I don't know.
Do you mind going any deeper into that? You were about to describe something there.
Well, I mean, it didn't start off well. With the you know, in the first 2 months, his drummer dies. They were kind of dark characters involved. I mean, you know, I met this the manager, Peter Grant, but the thing with Zeppelin is there was always a bit of a dark atmosphere surrounding them, And Jimmy was a sweetheart, really. He was very shy. I learnt so much from him. He was an amazing producer. The best project we did was probably the Death Wish, although it was a terrible film. When we worked on the Death Wish soundtrack, some of the technical stuff he got up to with the Roland guitar synth and the theremin that he uses, and some of his ideas, his production ideas. He's an amazing producer, one way or another. He is. Even if he can't play the lead guitar solo that he wants to play, he would devise a way of doing it. And he was very, very clever in the studio. I learnt a lot with him, and it's better to look back on it because we worked sort of bat hours. We'd be working at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were slightly strange times. But then we did the album with Paul Rodgers, The Firm, which was a brilliant album, great band, and working with Paul was like the best singer on the planet without a doubt.
Those must have been great sessions.
Yeah, they were brilliant sessions. In that same period as well, Elton booked the studio to do the Single Man album and then Ice on Fire. They were both done in that period. Although, no, I think Single Man was done when Gus still owned the studio, thinking about it. Yeah, it's a bit weird to think that Gus was okay with having Clive produce Elton in his studio.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems really weird now, because he must have been well pissed off that he wasn't producing it. But Ice on Fire, which wasn't I didn't have as much fun as I would have liked during that album. It was a bit of a chore, to be honest, to say the least. It just went on and on and on. The idea of that album, I don't know if you know this, not a lot of people know this, but the idea was that whereas Elton normally only wrote enough songs for an album, on this album he was going to write twice as many songs and choose the best songs, because for Gus this was going to be the best album Elton's ever made, without a doubt. It's going to be the very best. And actually it was also a moment because we were doing it digitally, and Gus wanted to do it digitally. We did experiments to see what was better, whether it was going to be better than analog. It was going to cost an absolute fortune, so Gus was putting everything into this, But pretty soon they all decided that everything was great, all the songs were great, so it was going to be a double album. And it wasn't really. There was probably one great album there, but not two. In fact, I've got the gold disc up there. So yeah, Elton was going through a bulimic period, and he was smoking joints like it was going out of fashion. We had fun though. I mean, I only remember him giggling throughout the whole album. I think that was all I remember, him laughing all the time. So we had fun, but it wasn't the greatest album. Well, although we had some great people on it. We had the Queen rhythm section, George Michael. There were some great musicians, Nick Kershaw.
When I listened to Ice on Fire, I remember when it came out, it's like, okay, Gus is going to work with Elton again. And then this album comes out. It just sounded like 80s music. It sounded like it didn't have any of that touch, and the songs weren't there. So I'm just kind of curious, did Gus lose his way as a producer? What do you think was happening there? Do you have any feelings about that?
Well, no, I was just sort of saying that the idea was, if Gus lost his way, his idea was this was going to be the ultimate album. And the thing is that everything Gus did was the ultimate anyway. So for Gus to go even further than the ultimate was probably going to be, there might be problems there anyway, because he always pushed it to the limit. And now we're going digital. We're having twice as many songs. Every song was going to have almost like a different rhythm section. I can remember this like it was yesterday, like the meetings, because what he decided now was he was going to actually have the bass and drummer chosen on what suited the song, you see. So as far as Gus was concerned, he was actually going beyond getting a band in like Hookfoot or getting Nigel and Dee in. This was like a new direction which was going to outshine anything that went before. And I suppose, to use the word modern, this was going to be putting Elton into the towards the 21st century or something. And that's how it was approached. I mean, digital was brand new. The thing with digital is it tends to make everything very clinical, really. That on its own, the digital move, and with Gus's production, that would be all this precise stuff anyway. There's a lot of things pointing to why it wasn't a great record. There isn't one thing, it's a lot of things. The main thing was that there were 20 songs and there were probably only 8 or 9 great ones, and we recorded all of them, and then they ended up on Leather Jackets, and no one likes Leather Jackets either. No one says much about Ice on Fire. I mean, the main track that came out of it was Nikita, really, which I've got a silver disc for. And to be honest, Nikita was the most boring track we recorded. And every time we started working on it, I used to fall asleep because it feels like it's been on for about 4 minutes and then it starts again. And I never dreamt that it would be a single or it would be something that kids like and it would be in films and all. Oh, Nikita! Oh, you fall asleep to that. The duet with Cliff was great. Love Cliff Richard to bits, and them in the studio doing the duet was amazing, you know. If anything, it wasn't Gus losing his way. It was him trying to be probably too clever, I suppose, or too much. I mean, I nearly had a nervous breakdown. In fact, I checked in at a health farm. I couldn't handle it. When we were doing the solo in Nikita, it seemed to go on for about a fortnight, 2 weeks, with Fred sitting there playing this solo for hours and hours and hours, you know. People would go off and then they come back a few days later and they say, well, you know, you're still working on this solo. But actually, if you hear that solo, it's amazing. Totally amazing. It's like a film. So you see, that's the thing with Gus's productions. They might have been hell if you were there to see the process. And to be honest, the first Elton album that Gus did was a bit like that. You know, he pushed the limits. You know, he booked an orchestra. It was all written out. No one did that. You know, if you think about the difference between Empty Sky and the Elton John album, it's like different band. It's a completely different band, completely different music. That's all down to Gus, really. It's not all down to Gus. Of course, Elton wrote the songs and Elton wrote the arrangements on that piano, semi-classical. It's Gus pushing the boundaries of production and sound. So that's all he was doing on that Ice and Fire, pushing the boundaries yet again. And he certainly pushed the boundaries as far as I think it cost £1 million, like $2 million to make that album or something. It was just mad. And of course, the fact that it didn't do very well isn't very good, you know. I mean, Elton has to pay for that one way or another. I can probably afford it now, but that's my answer to that.
Who is the most remarkable person you've ever worked with, musician or otherwise?
Elton.
Yeah.
Elton and Gus. Well, I'd say Elton, Gus, and Jimmy, and then Paul Rodgers, and there's quite a few.
Yes.
That's why it's been an amazing time, really, because I've been privileged and so privileged to be the other side of the glass with, say, Paul. Working together with Gus was, you know, he's on the wall here. I mean, that's where I learnt my trade as a producer, if you like, to know the utter limits that you could take at getting a sound. I never go as far as Gus goes. When having sat there with him through all those mixes and stuff, and his attention to detail and the whole bit, I mean, it's invaluable. You'd never learn that at a music school or college. These kids go to schools, right? And their teachers, that all they've done is taught. They've never done anything. If you say, what records did you make? Well, none. They went from student to teacher.
Yep.
And it's not a textbook thing, you know. You have to sit in a control room for a couple of years and see other people do it and how they do it, and keep your mouth shut and just keep your ears open to what's going on. And that's what I did, although I'm talking like 20 to the dozen. You probably can't imagine how I could be quiet, but I was in those days. You know, I'd sit at the mill soaking it all in, you know, taking it all in, and I would only put my hand up to say something after thinking about it for hours. If I was going to make a comment, I was thinking if I should make that comment, you know, the respect that I had for Gus, what he did to Elton's career, you know, how he transformed Elton's sound, And people like Paul Buckmaster, you know, and they were so incredible at what they did, you know, what they did.
What is the most memorable studio session or project? Was there a moment that just will stay with you forever?
That's not easy, really. When George Harrison came to the Mill on a Bill Wyman session, and yeah, that was a moment. You know, having George in the studio was, and I recorded him on slide guitar. Yeah, it was a band that Bill was producing, and George just turned up, and he's looking at the equipment, and I'm telling him about this and that, and it's like he doesn't know anything as well, you know, it's like he's, what's that, and all that. Anyway, and then Bill said, fancy putting some slide on something, and I thought, fucking hell, I gotta, how am I going to get the George Harrison slide sound?
Yeah.
You know, what am I going to put it through so it sounds like My Sweet Lord?
Yes.
And I thought, I don't know. Anyway, he plugged in a Strat, and he started playing, and it sounded like it sounded like George Harrison playing My Sweet Lord.
Yes.
I mean, the sound wasn't just what he was playing, and he was just DI, and I just couldn't. I thought, wow, that was easy.
It was DI. That's interesting.
Yeah, just DI.
I can't stand when these music guys talk about stuff that most people don't understand. What they're talking about is when you take a guitar and you plug it straight into the mixing board instead of going through a guitar amp. The way they do this is they use a DI. You plug the guitar into the DI, out of the DI, into the mixing board. When you plug the guitar straight into the mixing board, it sounds really pretty and shiny. If they had plugged it into a guitar amp, it would sound really dirty and nasty. You want to hear what dirty sounds like? Listen to this. Now listen to this, all pretty and shiny. Do you hear the difference? I know which one I like better.
So there've been moments, you know, there've been moments in the studio. If I had to pick one album out, I really don't know. It might be The Firm, you know, it might have been when we did the Firm album with Jimmy. I don't know, I've just been lucky really, where, you know, a lot of great bands came in and a lot of great moments in the studio.
All right, man. It's been so great talking to you. I really appreciate your time. Cheers to you. Thank you so much.
All right, John. God bless.
God bless you.
See you later.
I hope you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed talking with Stuart. Please like and subscribe. It really helps me get my videos out to a larger audience. Until next time, this is John Blackstone for Only Kid with the Camera. Cheers.